Hello, everybody. Were you hoping that Matt was going to be here today? He's not. We're having a total takeover, but out of honor with our fearless host, I have my little Goshen Consulting cup right here. So today we are going to talk about setting boundaries and, as a bonus, identifying client red flags where you may have to set a boundary. So my name is Becky Garrow. I am a public health research scientist located in Sacramento, California. Been doing this for about 15-ish years. And if you're thinking, wow, that sounds really boring, don't worry. I am also an interesting person. I also run Sacramento bike tours. So if you are ever in the capital city of Sacramento, hit me up. I'll show you our beautiful river and other historic sites. So why are we here today? It's not to take a bike tour. It's because Matt polled the independent consulting topical interest group and said, Becky's doing a takeover. What do you want to hear her talk about? And the two things that came out on top were client red flags and setting boundaries with clients, staff, and yourself. So that's what we're doing here today. By the way, this person, that is so nice. I love you. Who are you? Thank you. Most of the content we're going to be talking about today comes from Melissa's Urban Book of Boundaries. There are many boundary books, articles, and resources out there. They are all wonderful. This is an excellent book. I own this book. I encourage you to own this book too, even if you feel that you are good at setting boundaries, because it helps you develop clear, kind scripts that you can use with other people, family members, personal. The book is divided up into several different sections. So highly encourage people to get this book. A lot of this presentation is pulling from the scripts that Melissa Urban uses in this book. Let's set the stage. What is a boundary? Boundaries mark the limit of behaviors that are acceptable to you, where words or actions beyond that limit cause you harm or make you feel unsafe. Harm or unsafe are operational definitions that you can define, right? It may be like some serious harm or some serious unsafeness, right? But it could be harm to your business. It could be harm to your emotional or mental health. It could be harm to the time you're spending with your family, right? So make sure to think about things where you need to set a limit of behaviors that you're going to accept. These will help you plan and communicate your response to what other people say or do. This is important because a boundary is about your behavior, not somebody else's. Don't get all Jonah Hill on me, right? A boundary is about setting limits with your response to behavior, not asking somebody else to change theirs, right? So, an example in the independent consulting world, we would not want to say, don't ask me to complete any task not listed in the scope of work. You are asking somebody else to do something. Where in the world of boundary setting, we are going to establish a boundary with the client. So instead, we would say, I will not complete any tasks that are not listed in the scope of work. A boundary is not telling someone else what to do, it tells them what you will do. It is putting the responsibility on yourself, right? So, do you need a boundary? I think this is people will come up, right? Because we're all different. A boundary that I might need may not be a boundary that you need, and vice versa, right? So, guess what? He's back. Only you can decide when you are going to need a boundary. What is the limit of behaviors that are acceptable to you? Where you need to draw a line and make sure that you are communicating your response to a behavior so it's best for your health, right? But there are some signs that you might need a boundary. So, some general signs, right? You might feel negative or anxious after spending time with a person. You may be avoiding certain people, certain clients, certain coworkers, right? You're agreeing to everything just so things can go smoothly, or other people's feelings and time are prioritized over yours. This is very hard for our wonderful friends who are people pleasers, right? They tend to naturally gravitate over prioritizing other people's times or agreeing to everything. Some signs that you might need a boundary with your work. You may have clients or colleagues who expect you to work extra hours, nights, weekends, holidays, with or without pay, with or without your prior approval, or with or without you agreeing to expedited services, which we'll talk more about later in this presentation. You may have meetings that are always running long or starting late. You may have clients that are canceling at the last minute, changing the scope of work or timeline without discussions with you, or expecting you or your team to work other hours for free. These are signs you may need a boundary. There are ethical considerations, right? So I hear about this a lot from independent consultants or just people working in research and evaluation. You may be asked to tell white lies to clients or customers. You may be asked to fake, massage, or omit important data. You may be asked to compromise your integrity. These are signs you might need a boundary. Last little set of signs are pressure, right? You may be punished for setting healthy boundaries for yourself. You may not want to drink at work functions or post work functions, right? You may be punished for stopping your work at a reasonable time. You may be punished for saying or for only working 8 hours a day, right? There's also the issue of sexual harassment, off color jokes, homophobia, sexism, racism, any type of ism that may be tolerated or even celebrated in the workplace or with the client. So these are all signs that you might need a boundary. So, do any of these call to you that you might need a boundary? Maybe, right? Again, it's only you. Some people are totally fine with meetings running over. Some people can handle some of these off-color jokes, right? It's up to you. You need to think about where you need to draw a line and determine the set of behaviors that are acceptable to you. So, there are typically 3 steps for identifying boundaries as well as red flags with your clients, right? These are the 3 steps you will need to take. You will need to identify the need for a boundary. We just talked about some common ones. You may have your own, right? But it's really becoming crystal clear with yourself. I need a boundary here. That's what will be best for me. You will then need to set that boundary using clear, kind language. These get harder for people as we go on. The hardest one, you will need to hold that boundary. If you are not holding a boundary, you essentially do not have one. Other people will learn that when you set a boundary, it doesn't mean anything if you can't hold it, right? So when you're identifying the need for a boundary, just make sure to think about it. I really recommend you write it down or you type it out and that you are prepared to communicate it or prepared to enforce it. It's going to cause you some internal turmoil if you are developing boundaries and you are not prepared to communicate or enforce it, right? Remember, boundaries mark the limit of behaviors that are acceptable to you where words or actions beyond that limit cause you harm or make you feel unsafe. They help you plan to communicate your response. You're not asking other people to change their behavior. You're telling what your response will be to their behavior, right? So, this book from Melissa Urban offers probably well over 100 scripts for setting boundaries, and we're going to talk about them. But something important when we are setting our boundaries, it's not your job to guess Becky Garrow's boundaries. It's to me to set them and hold them, right? And then to communicate them in a clear and kind way so that you know. We don't want to make people guess what our boundaries may or may not be. We need to use assertive, clear, kind language to set them. So Melissa actually breaks her boundary levels up into 3 tiers, right? And I actually really like this. So she's got the low risk. So when you're communicating your boundary, you may be using gentle language. Hey, FYI, elevated risk, and then severe, right? We upgrade this to a co-red. So low risk when we're communicating, I'm assuming that what someone did, they were unaware that that maybe wasn't going to work well for me. I'm assuming that they want to respect any boundaries they might hold. My language to them, it's clear, it's generous, it's really kind. I might not even talk about consequences be just in the spirit of good faith, right? Elevated risk. So these are boundaries where our green may not have been followed up, right? We're seeing the same again and again. It may have history. We're still going to assume respect, still want to be clear, generous, and kind in our language, if not a bit firmer. We may include our intended consequence, right? Of course, then we have our high risk boundary. These are boundaries where we're using our most direct language, which is still clear and kind. This is our final reminder. You are ready to enforce the consequences of this boundary. So here are some scripts using that 3-tiered system that Melissa came up with for responding to boundaries that you've set. I have chosen ones that I think are most relevant to the independent consulting TIG at AEA. So, you may have a client that is asking for favors or wants you to work after a contract has ended. I'm sure like at least 50% of us can say that this has happened, right? So, depending on your relationship and the history with the client, you probably start out with a green and say, hey, I can send you a few quick thoughts by the end of the week, but that's all I have capacity for, right? More clear. Unfortunately, I can't help unless we establish a new contract, right? You can see how these would be variable. Red, I cannot. Our time together is up and I've got other projects now, right? Again, up to you to decide what color coding level you need to go for the client. Some people may get a couple greens, right? Your client is always canceling meetings last minute, or they are ignoring your 24-hour cancellation policy. So the green is just the reminder, right? Setting up the cancellation policy in your agreements is going to be really important. Garrow Consulting Incorporated policy, we have a full charge. If you cancel a meeting within 24 hours, we still charge for the meeting, full, right? So green may just be to remind someone of the policy. Yellow, thanks for letting me know. Since you're canceling within 24 hours, just state the policy. Maybe you enforce it, maybe you don't. Red is enforcement. We are enforcing the policy. And if you want, you can notify that they have one more no-show. You're no longer going to accept meeting requests. I can actually hear many of you saying right now, Becky, I don't care if someone cancels a meeting with me with less than 24 hours notice. What's going on? Harsh. Friends, that's fine. Remember, only you can decide the boundaries that you are going to need to set with clients and personal and professional relationships, right? So, with my type of work, meetings are actually very disruptive. I need long blocks of uninterrupted time to do deep work with report writing or with data. Having meetings in a day breaks up that work. I will set aside time for a client, but I need that client to also honor the time that I've set aside for them, right? Going to our ethics, a client is asking us to do something questionable. Green boundary. I'm not comfortable with that. Yellow boundary. This is a good one. That doesn't feel good to me. I'd like to check with insert strategic name here. The client, human resources, your colleague, the contract manager, if they're asking you to do something questionable outside of the scope. It's usually at this point someone will backpedal and be like, you know what, it's okay. I've got it, right? But if they don't, because there are those people, share your concerns in writing to document. Today you asked me to X. I'm not comfortable with that. Don't think it's in the best interest of whoever. I would rather not be involved in this stage, right? Somebody is making inappropriate remarks in the workplace. So give people the benefit of the doubt with green. Oof, I don't know if you realize how poorly what you said just came across. Do you want to try again? Hey, FYI, this is really important. When someone makes a remark that's inappropriate, sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. So we don't want to call people out. We want to call people in. The green boundary is maybe set in private, right? No, 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 no. What you just said is not okay. I will not let it slide. And then red, when this has happened multiple times or is totally egregious, that's legitimately inappropriate. I cannot stay silent when I hear things like that. Are these the best scripts for you? Maybe, maybe not. The point is, I encourage you, if these are things that are happening, identify the need for the boundary and create your own scripts. There's actually a lot of really great resources and guides for responding to inappropriate remarks, personally and professionally, that are out there. Someone may be asking you too many personal questions. And again, some of us are pretty open. We share a lot about our personal lives. Some of us like to keep things really private and separate from work. Again, it's not someone else's job to guess your boundary. It's your job to communicate boundaries, right? So green might be like, hey, you know me, I like to keep it mysterious. It's the mystery vehicle over here, right? With Scooby-Doo. I don't really want to talk about blank at work. Change the subject. Red. I'm not going to answer that. That's all you have to say. I want you to notice that with all of these boundary scripts that Melissa has provided, they are very clear. I like this saying by Brene Brown, clear is kind, right? Be clear. We also do not need to over explain our boundaries. You do not need to give a reason for your boundaries if you do not want to. Somebody does not need to understand your boundary to respect it. Providing people additional information can be helpful, and in some contexts that may be appropriate, it's never required. Okay. So, a little bonus because we got some of these in the comments in this request for this presentation, self boundaries at work. So, these are boundaries that you are setting with yourself. You asked, we're going to try and answer, right? So, self boundaries at work. Here are a few things that this book offers that I think are very helpful for encouraging you to set boundaries with yourself at work, especially with a group of independent consultants where the majority of us are working at home, right? So, have a dedicated workspace. That doesn't mean you need an entire room dedicated to an office, right? But a specific spot in your home, in your office, where you can say, and this is where I work. When I come to this spot, I am working. When I leave this spot, I am not working, right? Likewise, take breaks and take a lunch. Leave your workspace when you do this. This is why it is challenging. And for some of us, if you're living in New York or San Francisco, we get it. You're living in like a 400 square foot apartment with 6 other people. It's cool, right? But if you are not doing that, it is helpful to have your workspace not be at the kitchen table, not be on your bed, right? We want to dedicate those places for resting and for eating. We want to separate that from work. This is just helpful for a lot of us to sort of provide that divide between work and home life, right? At the end of your workday, it is helpful to have a ending ritual or a transition ritual. Maybe you clean your desk, right? Maybe you physically turn off your computer or laptop. For a transition ritual, I like to make up a commute. So every day I commute to work. I get up, I walk around the block, or maybe a longer walk, or maybe a bike ride. Now I have arrived at work, right? But I have these little rituals to help my mind transition from the workday into my personal life, right? Once you have transitioned away from work, don't go back to work. Don't check your email. Don't check your checks. Don't log into Slack or Teams or any of these things. Do not have emails popping up on your phone. Silence those things. You need to be in charge of your email and your alerts. You don't want your phone being in charge of you. You will decide when you log in and check your email. You don't want your phone popping up with every message that comes up, right? And people say, oh, but it's so easy, but I'm right here, like, oh, I'm doing something. And to that, I say, go do something else with your life. After 5 o'clock or whenever the end of your workday is, right? Some of us are working like noon to 8. That's fine. Go do something else with your life. There's a big world out here. Come to Sacramento. I'll take you on a bike tour, right? We hear from people in the comments for this presentation. I'm too busy, I'm overworked, I'm reaching burnout, etc. So it is helpful to actually set a boundary script with yourself. So you may set a boundary that says, I am not taking on another client today, this month, this quarter, this year, this decade, whatever. The boundary may be, I'm not going to allow myself to book more than 4 meetings a day. Now that's from Melissa Urban. If I had 4 meetings a day, I would scream, right? So again, only you can decide the boundaries that you need to set. Your boundary might be, I don't work more than 8 hours a day and I will not work Sundays. And I really encourage you to think about the thinking behind your boundary. So if you hold up this boundary, we're talking about this overworked burnout, right? If you uphold it, what are the positive things that are going to happen? You're going to have more time to spend with your current clients, more time to recharge and rest. You will be free from the stress of missing deadlines or working too much because you've set that boundary. You've eliminated that possibility from happening. You'll be free to evaluate your goals against a realistic workload. And you'll be free to structure your business how you want, right? You won't be in constant contact and communication because you are overworked, burned out, and have too many clients, projects, or workload. If you do not uphold this boundary, so if you're setting a boundary with yourself, I would actually think about the reasons or the consequences you will experience if you don't uphold this boundary. You will continue to feel overworked. You will continue to stress about missing deadlines. You will end each day probably feeling like you didn't do enough. You will feel unsuccessful because you are not meeting your goals or taking care of yourself. Your physical and mental health may suffer, right? So, again, bonus set these boundaries with yourself at work. A reminder people do not need to understand or agree with your boundary to accept it. Okay. Tools and tips for boundary enforcement. Contracts and agreements. We talk about this so much in the independent consulting topical interest group. It starts with your contracts, right? It starts with you agreements. Clear communication in here. You can always push back on a contract. When a client sends you a contract, feel free to review that intellectual property section. Feel free to review the payment terms and schedule section, right? There's usually opportunities for you to adjust the contract. Just because they send you something over with a lot of legalese language, that doesn't mean it's set in stone. Make sure that the payment terms, the deliverables, the timelines, the exit strategies, if you decide to end the partnership, are listed in there, as well as any other boundaries that are important to you. So, boundaries that are really important to me and that I always make sure are in my contracts, I always have policies for meeting cancellations. If you cancel a meeting with less than 24 hours notice, we just charge you fully for the meeting. I don't say anything on it. They'll see it on the invoice, right? We also charge for expedited services. So, if a client wants work done that is going to have less than 2 days notice, is going to require work on nights, on weekends, or on a United States federal holiday, first they have to ask us, "Are you available to complete expedited services?" And we will say yes or no, and we charge double our hourly rate for that. So, 2 things. This can create a nice fiscal incentive for somebody to do some additional work, either you or someone else on your team. It lets your client know there are consequences if they wait until the last minute to enforce this. So, this is helpful in 2 ways. Number one, I have clients who are really aware of this policy, do not want to pay expedited services, very on time with their communication, their draft report feedback, all that good stuff. I have other clients who aren't and love expedited services. So if I do have free time or would like to make space for that or think, yeah, I could totally do that this weekend and then maybe take Wednesday off because that's really important for me, I can decide to accept a job for expedited services, right? It's something that you can decide on. I highly recommend expedited services in every contract. So, just last, a little summary tips. Identify your boundaries, write out your scripts ahead of time, communicate them clearly and consistently from the start. If you're like, oh no, the start happened years ago, that's okay. You can start now. Today can be the start, right? Reinforce these boundaries as needed during the project using your assertive communication. You want to be assertive but polite. We want to avoid, so I tend to gravitate towards aggressive, and I'm always trying to pull myself back to being assertive, not aggressive. We also want to avoid being passive or passive aggressive. Be clear when we enforce these boundaries. Use the I or we statements. I need at least 24 hours notice for meeting changes. Again, these are our responses to behavior. We're not asking people to change their behavior. I don't want to say, you need to give me at least 24 hours notice. It's me, right? Don't be afraid to end the contract or end a personal or professional relationship if someone is not able to respect your boundaries, right? Um, I really believe that by setting boundaries and making sure that we have the mental energy to be creative, to be diligent in our work, we need to get rid of the people that are not respecting our boundaries, right? Time and time again. It is scary to end a contract, especially when you're an independent consultant. But if you can free up your time and energy to pursue new relationships where someone can respect your boundary or a client can respect your boundary, I definitely think that's worth it. Reminder, a boundary doesn't tell someone what to do, it tells them what you will do. And only you can decide what boundaries you're going to need in your life. We are now going to transition from the Smokey the Bear PSAs to a little story, Smokey the Bear. So we're going to end this YouTube video and then have a discussion with the people on here. Thank you so much.